Hello and welcome to Maya with Haste. Today we're going to take a look at primitive objects and how to manipulate them using the channel box and attribute editor. Make sure you have your polygons shelf activated. Here in the upper left hand corner you're going to have your different primitive objects that can be added very easily just with a click of a button. If you don't see your shelf or you don't want to use it, you can also go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and then choose one of the primitives you see here. There are actually a few more primitives here than there are on your shelf. In addition, if you wanted to hold down the space bar on your keyboard, you'll also get access to your Create panel right there with Polygon Primitives. We can break that out by clicking on the dotted portion of the upper title of that bar, and now we of course see all the different primitive types we have right here. Now if that wasn't enough options, you can also hold the Shift key and right click on open space in your viewport and create a polyplane, cylinder, cone, cube, torus, or sphere, as well as a few other options. Go ahead and generate one of these polygon objects on your screen. In my case, I'm going to make a sphere. In order to edit this object and create something of interest, maybe we want more or fewer sides, or maybe we'd like to increase the radius, we can go over here to the upper right hand portion of our screen. Right here is a series of what look like stacked planes. If you click that, it's going to bring open your channel box / layer editor pane. At the bottom half is your layer editor. We're not going to talk about that here. What we care about is the top half right here. The most important thing with most objects is the name. That's the first thing we see right here. Right now it's called a generic P-Sphere1. If we go to Window and then go to Outliner, we'll see all the names of objects. There you can see it's P-Sphere1. Let's change it to something a little bit more reflective of what we want it to be. Let's just call it ball_01. Now we see that the name has changed in our outliner, and that is how we refer to that object. Next up are the translate, rotate, and scale values. So if you use the W, E, and R key as we covered in the last video and move your object, you'll notice that these values interactively update along with it. If we click the E key to rotate, you can see that those values are rotating as well, and of course the same with the scale term. Then we have the input node, and the input node is part of the history of this object. The history of an object is how that object is crafted or created inside of Maya. As you learn how to edit objects and add commands to them, this inputs panel is going to get very large and full of different kinds of information. It's basically a giant network showing you how to go from the start of your object all the way to the end to create what you see on the screen. Right now it's just a simple primitive object. Therefore we only have things that, well, generate primitives. In this case we're dealing with a sphere, so we have a radius we're working with and subdivisional axes. Now if we click on any one of these areas and highlight it in blue and then use the middle mouse button to interactively drag left and right by holding it down and moving the mouse to the left and the right, we can modify that value in real time. In this case, we're modifying the subdivisional axes to make this object more or less detailed. We can of course also do that with the radius. You can also specify a number manually in here if you'd like, instead of using the interactive scrolling. Let's use 1.0 for our object. Now, this is the same for all objects, so if we bring a cube in here, we'll also have another input down here, but now these inputs are different. These properties pertain to a cube and not a sphere, so we have the ability to adjust the height, the depth, and of course the width, and all the different subdivisional information along each axis. I recommend you go through all the different primitive objects, and you take a look at all the different inputs you have on the side, such as radius, height, and so forth and so on. Each one of these objects will have different inputs depending upon how complicated that object is to create. Remember to remove objects after you've generated them, just grab it, select it, and hit the delete key. I'm going to go back to my sphere example really quickly, and I'm going to open up a different window, and that is the attribute editor. Now this window is showing all of your attributes. That is everything necessary to make up your object. On the far right is a very important parameter. This is our material. In this case, it's called Fong1. This is actually the default material in Maya. I don't recommend you ever edit this because it's, well, every object that comes into the scene will be linked to this Fong1, and if you modify it for one object, you're actually going to modify it for every object in the scene. Now in the attribute editor, it's very similar to the channel box, except there's far more information about our object. It is literally displaying all the different potential parameters we could modify. So for instance, not only our transform information, but how we handle with our pivots, whether it's local or world space and its pivot point for those respective locations, how we display this object on screen. You can override a tremendous number of features inside of this window. Now the next tab of interest to us is the Polysphere1 tab. Now this is what generates your object. This is the object right down here under inputs called Polysphere1. Of course, you can rename this if you want to, so we can call this sphere generator, something a little bit more interesting. Come back over here to the channel box, you'll notice now that our input is called sphere generator. This is good if for some reason you actually need to label your inputs. Maybe you have a very complicated object that relies on a lot of different kinds of things to build it, and you want to make sure each one is clearly labeled. Although for most things, you're just going to want to use the default name because you're going to be deleting your history anyway, and we'll show that in a moment. But as you can see here, we can adjust our radius as before and our subdivision axes, and there's a little bit more information here than displayed on the other screen. So we have our inputs over here, and maybe we're not interested in having any of those inputs, or maybe we don't want to allow individuals to modify these parameters after it has been generated. Or maybe our system is running low on memory, and what we need to do is delete all these inputs. Now what you might not understand at first is that Maya uses these inputs to generate the object on the screen. And if any changes are made to this object, it actually has to go through the hierarchy, finding nodes or inputs that are dirty, that have been modified, and then regenerating that object. Therefore, if you have a lot of history in this object, you're going to slow down your computer. Easiest way to get rid of the history is to go to Edit, Delete by Type, and then History, which is also Alt-Shift-D on your keyboard. You can also delete all history in your scene, but I recommend being careful with this option in the future. Let's go ahead and delete that history, and what you'll immediately notice is that all of our inputs are gone. If we go to our attribute editor, things have been far more simplified. We no longer have that sphere generator tab from before that was controlling how this primitive is generated. I hope you enjoyed this quick video on Polygon primitives inside of Maya. Remember to like and subscribe if you want more of this content. Thank you. Bye.